My name is Madison Carter, and I never forgot the moment that rewrote the entire story of my life, not just for me, but for everyone who thought they knew who I was. It was supposed to be my sister's big day. The entire family was there, gathered in full military dress, the same polished metals glinting under the cold white lights of the Peterson Air Force Base auditorium. The banners were perfectly arranged flags flanking the stage rows of officers standing sharp and upright, every inch of the ceremony screaming dignity, discipline, and tradition. This was the kind of event my family was built for. The Carters weren't just a military family, we were practically military royalty. My father, Brigadier General Thomas Carter, had served with distinction at NORAD for decades. My mother, Eleanor Carter, had spent half her life in combat hospitals patching up soldiers across continents. My two brothers had both risen through Army intelligence with ease, and my younger sister, Vanessa, well, she was the golden child, the one who never missed a promotion, the one whose face always appeared in every framed photo lining our parents' hallway. Everyone had gathered to witness her being promoted to full colonel, and I sat quietly in the back, just like always. Unseen, unimportant, the forgotten one. They never said I was a failure out loud. They didn't have to. I saw it in the way my mother's eyes always drifted toward Vanessa when people asked about the family. I felt it in my father's firm but distant handshake every holiday. I heard it in every polite, clipped response to my small talk, like I was an outsider visiting a family I barely belonged to. And worst of all, I heard it in my mother's voice that morning just before the ceremony when she called and said, "You are coming right. Just don't wear anything that draws attention. This is Vanessa's day." This had always been Vanessa's family. I was just allowed to exist in the background. They told the world that I washed out of the academy after my first year, that I couldn't handle the pressure, that I didn't have what it took. And no one ever questioned it, because no one ever saw me again. But the truth was far more complicated than that. I didn't leave because I failed. I left because I was recruited, because someone saw in me something my family never did. I still remember that day as vividly as I remember the day I left for the academy. I was 19. My uniform was still stiff, the fabric scratching against my neck, as I stood in the office of a man whose name I wasn't allowed to repeat. His words were brief, but they changed everything. "You have the kind of mind we can't afford to waste in the classroom. You won't graduate with your class, Madison. You're going somewhere else." Somewhere else turned out to be a world most people never hear about. Not in the newspapers, not in classified briefings, not even behind closed doors in the highest offices of command. For the next 20 years, my life disappeared into the shadows. No medals, no ceremonies, no family photographs, just silence. And while my family moved on, celebrating each of Vanessa's promotions, attending my brother's weddings in full dress uniform, clinking champagne glasses at retirement ceremonies, I was running black operations across continents, preventing cyber attacks before they reached American soil, tracking digital threats that could have collapsed global economies, intercepting rogue military operations before they ignited full-blown wars. But at every holiday, every phone call, every brief moment home, it was the same. Vanessa got another award. Daniel's team just finished an assignment overseas. Steven's working on a new joint intelligence task force. And then that polite silence whenever anyone tried to mention me. As if my absence meant I'd simply failed. As if failure was easier to explain than absence. Until that day at Peterson Air Force Base. Until the moment the doors opened behind me and General Patrick Whitaker, commander of Joint Cyber Command, walked into the hall. His eyes swept across the sea of uniforms before landing on me. His pace slowed. He stopped right at my row, raised his hand in a sharp salute, and declared loud enough for the entire room to hear, "General Carter, ma'am. We've been waiting for your leadership." The gasps rippled through the audience like a wave crashing against a shoreline. My sister's voice cracked mid-sentence. My father stiffened in his seat. My mother's hands trembled, clutching her purse. The silence that followed was heavier than the weight of every medal pinned on every chest in that room. The daughter they thought they buried in failure was the highest-ranking officer in the family. That moment in the auditorium should have felt like vindication, but it didn't. It felt like an earthquake, one that had been waiting under the surface of my life for decades. As I stood quietly after the general's words, I could feel every pair of eyes scanning me. Some faces held confusion, others held curiosity. But my family couldn't hide the shock. Vanessa was frozen at the podium. Her hands gripped the edges of the wooden stand so tightly her knuckles turned white. She tried to recover, cleared her throat, adjusted her notes, smiled stiffly. But the energy had shifted entirely. She was no longer the center of attention. For the first time in her life, someone else in the family was being seen. And not just someone, me. The ceremony continued in mechanical form. Speeches were read, medals presented, official photos taken. But the celebration felt hollow, like we were all walking through a script everyone suddenly realized had been miswritten. After the formalities, there was the family dinner, an intimate gathering at my parents' home in Colorado Springs. The house hadn't changed in years. Same neutral paint, same military portraits lining the hallway, same photographs, Vanessa front and center, my brothers proudly posed in their uniforms, my parents smiling like the perfect model of American service. And my face, nowhere. The last photo I was in had been taken when I left the academy. I wasn't just invisible, I'd been erased. Dinner was polite, it always was. Conversations revolved around promotions, deployments, committee assignments, and speeches. My father led the table with his usual command. My mother played hostess, smiling, correcting the placement of silverware, refilling water glasses. Vanessa dressed impeccably in her dress. Blues was still stiff. She laughed a little too hard at jokes, smiled a little too wide, and kept glancing at me between bites like she was waiting for something to be said. I said nothing. Finally, during dessert, the first crack broke through. My father looked at me, his voice calm but clipped. I have to admit, Madison, we were surprised today. The room stiffened. I met his eyes directly. Surprised how? He cleared his throat. We didn't know you had continued in any official capacity. Vanessa chimed in quickly, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. I think what Dad means is, we assumed you left all this behind. A long time ago. I smiled gently, placing my fork down. That's one way to put it. The silence that followed was heavy. They weren't asking because they wanted answers. They were asking because for the first time, they no longer controlled the narrative. Later that night, as the rest of the family retreated to bedrooms and guest rooms, I stepped out onto the back porch. The Colorado night air was cool and sharp, filled with the distant hum of military aircraft from the nearby base. Above me, the stars blinked like silent sentinels. I heard the door creak open behind me. Vanessa stepped outside, her arms folded across her chest. Her voice was quiet but tense. You could have told us. I didn't turn to face her. Told you what? She exhaled sharply. Everything. What you've been doing. Who you really are. I finally looked at her. You never asked. She flinched at that. I wasn't trying to. Her voice wavered slightly. None of us thought you made it. Made it. That was the phrase they used for people who succeeded. You mean you assumed I failed, I corrected. She said nothing. In that silence, I saw more than her words could admit. The envy, the resentment, the years she had been celebrated while I was forgotten. For years, Vanessa had lived under the comfort of being the successful one, and now that illusion had shattered. She wasn't prepared for a world where she wasn't the brightest star. But I didn't come home to fight. I came home because I thought for once they might finally see me for who I was. And yet even now they struggled. Even now they needed to rewrite the story to fit their version of me. The next morning came early. Before sunrise, my phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an internal channel. Emergency review triggered. Classified data leak detected. Subject Operation Eclipse. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Operation Eclipse. One of my most sensitive assignments. One that had remained sealed, buried beneath the highest security clearances. And now, it was compromised. Someone had leaked highly restricted files, not only exposing the operation itself, but linking my command signature directly to decisions that, if twisted, could imply recklessness and misconduct. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a coincidence. The timing, the location, everything lined up far too neatly. Someone was targeting me, and they knew exactly when to strike. Within hours of receiving the alert, I was summoned to a secure briefing room at the Joint Cyber Defense Command headquarters. The air inside was heavy. General Patrick Whitaker sat at the head of the conference table, his face calm but sharp. The kind of calm you only see in men who've walked through too many fires. Around the table were officials from military intelligence, internal affairs, and the National Security Council. The leak wasn't small. Files from Operation Eclipse had surfaced online through an encrypted channel linked to a fringe foreign intelligence blog, one known for exposing classified information. The leaked documents painted a very deliberate story. They claimed I had authorized an unsanctioned cyberstrike in Tehran that risked civilian infrastructure, suggesting recklessness, even potential war crimes. The narrative was surgical, just enough truth to sound plausible, but twisted enough to destroy my credibility. If these allegations held, not only would my NATO appointment be dead, but my entire career would be dismantled. And it wouldn't stop there. There would be hearings, investigations, political fallout. Everything I'd spent 2 decades building gone. But I knew the truth. I knew what Operation Eclipse really was. And I knew someone was deliberately trying to burn me down from the inside. The forensic trail was subtle but clear. Whoever leaked the files had gained access through an old internal server, one that hadn't been active in nearly 3 years, one that had only been accessed by a handful of personnel, one that Vanessa used during her Cyber Command internship. My pulse slowed, my breath evened. No, it couldn't be her. Or could it? The timing, the resentment, the way she looked at me at the ceremony. No, I shook the thought. Vanessa was ambitious, yes, but reckless, a traitor, that didn't fit. But someone was using her as a vector, someone who knew both my history and my family. That's when the name surfaced. Everett Monroe. The moment his file slid across the table, everything inside me turned cold. Years ago, Monroe had been a rising star at the NSA, brilliant, charming, dangerous. He specialized in offensive cyber operations, the kind that blurred every ethical line. I exposed him. I brought evidence to the Joint Oversight Committee that led to his discharge. He lost everything, but he didn't disappear. He simply went underground. For years, Monroe operated on the fringe, consulting with foreign entities, building private digital warfare capabilities, recruiting mercenary-level coders, and manipulating black market data streams. And now he was back, and he was using my sister. The perfect leverage, the perfect inside access, the perfect way to strike at me while hiding behind someone I cared about. For the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I ran parallel investigations with General Whitaker's full authorization. We traced encrypted backdoors, dissected packet routes, and hunted digital fingerprints. Every lead pointed back to Monroe's network. And yet every trail also danced around Vanessa's old login credentials. The more we dug, the more painful the evidence became. Vanessa hadn't just been used. She had helped knowingly or not. The worst confirmation came late one night. I sat alone in my secure office reviewing metadata logs from the leaked files. A fragment of encrypted communication caught my eye, buried inside the packet headers. A unique phrase embedded in the encryption key: burn shadows to expose light. It was Monroe's personal signature. I'd seen him use it before, years ago, when he tried to justify his unauthorized operations. He was taunting me. This wasn't just an attack on my career. This was personal. He wanted me discredited. He wanted my family shattered. And most of all, he wanted me to see it all happen helpless. But I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. The following morning, I requested a private audience with General Whitaker. As I laid out the data, the timelines, the connections, his face remained unreadable. When I finished, he leaned forward. "Madison," he said, voice low, "you want authority to take point on this." "Yes, sir." "You realize where this leads, don't you?" I nodded. "Straight through my own family." He exhaled slowly. "Then you have it. Full operational clearance, full discretion." He stood and extended his hand. "Bring him in." I left his office with a weight in my chest I hadn't felt in years, because now for the first time, I wasn't hunting an enemy. I was hunting my own bloodline's fracture point. The investigation wasn't just professional anymore, it was personal. I was about to launch an internal task force that no one had ever dared attempt a classified family-centered inquiry, sanctioned at the highest level of national security. The participants myself, my father, my mother, and Vanessa. The first meeting took place inside a secured conference room at Joint Cyber Command headquarters. A place my family had only heard about in rumors now sitting uncomfortably within its walls. The air was cold, sterile, like the truth we were about to excavate. My father sat straight-backed, his face locked in that familiar tight-lipped military mask, the one that hid judgment behind professionalism. My mother shifted slightly in her chair, her eyes quietly scanning, taking mental notes. The trained instincts of a trauma surgeon watching her own family bleed silently. And then there was Vanessa, arms crossed, jaw tight, posture, defensive eyes, sharp but flickering with something beneath fear. No one spoke first. So I did. "Let's be clear," I began calmly. "This isn't about accusations. It's about exposure. There's a leak, and it involves systems you accessed, Vanessa." My sister's eyes narrowed immediately. "I never leaked classified data. You accessed archived nodes 3 years ago," I continued. "The same nodes Monroe's breach is now attached to." Her voice spiked brittle. "That was part of my internship rotation. I didn't pull anything I wasn't authorized to see." "But you didn't secure the terminal either," I countered gently. "Monroe didn't need you to steal the data. He only needed you to open the door." She flinched. My father's voice cut in. "We need facts, not speculation." I turned toward him, my tone still steady. "The facts are already mapped, sir. I'm not speculating, I'm tracking." Vanessa slammed her palm lightly on the table, her composure cracking. "You think I wanted to give him anything? You think I planned for this?" "No," I replied, softer now. "I think you didn't realize how much he was watching you, how much he used your ambition, your need to finally be seen." The words landed like a blade, because the truth was she did want to be seen. She always had. I had spent 2 decades erased from family photos, conversations, and recognition. Vanessa had spent those same decades living under the pressure of being their golden child, but always with my invisible shadow lingering in the backdrop. For several long moments, the room was silent. Then my mother whispered, barely audible, "How long has Monroe been manipulating our daughter?" I exhaled. "Since the day I exposed him." The next few days became a surgical dissection of data trails. Hours spent inside secure labs. Thousands of access logs reviewed line by line. Every small mistake, every unauthorized ping, every unsecured pathway that Monroe exploited, all of it was cataloged. Piece by piece, the digital puzzle came into view. And at its center sat both Monroe's calculated orchestration and Vanessa's misguided desperation. Then came the break. While running a secondary system sweep, our forensics AI flagged something dormant, a buried malware fragment tucked into an old logistics archive from 2017. The exact year I had exposed Monroe. It wasn't accidental. Monroe had planted backdoors years earlier, sleeping viruses waiting for triggers. Vanessa's casual terminal accesses had unknowingly triggered those pathways. The moment I saw the timestamp, everything clicked. This was never just about sabotage. It was about revenge. Monroe hadn't simply used Vanessa. He had built an elaborate, time-delayed trap designed to eventually collapse my career when the political timing was most vulnerable. He waited for NATO. He waited for my family's attention to be fixated elsewhere. He waited until Vanessa's promotion, when the family's pride would blind them from seeing what was happening beneath their own feet. And then he struck. I stared at the data, my stomach churning. Because now, I had enough. Enough to track Monroe's live command systems. Enough to secure a warrant. Enough to end this. But the cost was steep, because this was the moment where family stopped being a shield and became evidence. The evidence was clear. The trail led us directly to him. Monroe wasn't hiding overseas as we once assumed. He was closer, operating out of a private offshore relay hub just outside the Florida Keys. A forgotten corner of the old intelligence network abandoned after a decade of budget cuts and classified decommissioning. The perfect place to vanish without technically leaving American soil. He was arrogant. He thought he was untouchable, and that was his first mistake. General Whitaker signed off on the strike. This wouldn't be a standard arrest. We couldn't risk Monroe triggering deadman failsafes that would release more classified files into hostile hands. The operation needed to be surgical, fast, precise, and invisible. We moved under emergency covert authorization, a joint federal task force, blending Cyber Defense Command military intelligence and tactical response. By 300 hours, we had eyes on the facility. Night vision feeds streamed into my operations console. I watched silently as the strike team advanced. The warehouse was quiet. No guards, no movement, no alarm triggers. Only Monroe's live signal broadcasting from within. At 3:12 hours, the breach team entered. They swept through the facility with swift, disciplined efficiency. Then the call came through my earpiece. Target secured, no resistance. The visual feed locked onto Monroe as two agents restrained him in front of his workbench. He looked up calmly, not afraid, not angry. Smug, like he had been waiting. When I entered the secure holding cell, he was already seated, shackled, staring directly at me. I didn't flinch. Neither did he. "Long time, General Carter," he said smoothly. "I was beginning to wonder when you'd catch up." "You made mistakes," I replied coldly. "I made investments," he corrected. "Some of them paid off beautifully." His smirk widened. "You always underestimated me, just like your family always underestimated you." He leaned forward, slightly lowering his voice. "But not Vanessa. She didn't underestimate you. She feared you. That's why she reached for me." The words were designed to cut deep, to make me question everything about my sister. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "You manipulated her," I said evenly. "I gave her what she was already reaching for," Monroe countered. "She wanted to matter." I simply opened the door. I let the silence hang. Because in that moment I understood the game. Monroe never expected to take me down publicly. He wanted me isolated, removed from positions of power quietly, humiliated without headlines, stripped of clearance, credibility, and career, all without ever firing a shot. And he had almost succeeded. I stood up from the table, my voice calm. "You won't see daylight again." Monroe smiled faintly. "I've seen enough already. You'll be the one sitting in rooms like this long after I'm gone, questioning everyone you thought you could trust." I walked out without another word, because what he said didn't matter anymore. We had him, but the real damage, that was waiting for me back home. Because Monroe may have planted the virus, but it was my sister who gave him the key. The following morning, the official report was filed. Federal charges secured. Monroe was transferred under maximum security protocols. The immediate threat was neutralized. But for Vanessa, the reckoning was just beginning. That evening, back inside the same family home where this all began, I sat across from her at the old dining table. No lawyers, no commanders, no ranks. Just sisters. Her eyes were red. Her voice trembled as she finally spoke. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. "I never thought he would. I just wanted—" She stopped herself, choking back the admission. "You wanted to be seen," I finished for her. She nodded, tears sliding silently down her face. "All I ever heard growing up was Madison this, Madison that. Even when you weren't there, they still talked about you." I couldn't escape it. Her shoulders slumped. "I thought if I could prove myself on my own, if I could just— if you weren't standing in my shadow anymore, maybe they'd finally see me." I sat quietly for several seconds, letting her words hang. And then I spoke, not with anger, but with the clarity that comes after too many years of silence. "You can't build your worth by erasing someone else's." Her face crumbled, not into sobs, but into quiet shame. It was enough. I didn't need her to fall apart. I needed her to understand. With Monroe in custody, most assumed the crisis was over. It wasn't. His arrest stopped the external threat. But the internal fractures, the ones inside my own family, remained wide open. And the official investigation wasn't finished. General Whitaker made one final order, one that surprised even me. The internal task force would continue, and my own family would remain involved. My father overseeing historical intelligence records, my mother providing psychological profiling support, Vanessa assigned to assist in system vulnerability tracing under strict supervision, and me leading them all. We gathered daily in a private command suite. Every session felt like walking across a frozen lake, never sure when or where the ice would crack. My father spoke only when necessary, keeping his eyes glued to the screens, never fully looking at me. He couldn't yet face what was unraveling, not about the investigation, not about our family. My mother's gaze bounced between all of us, concerned but professional, as though still treating soldiers under triage. Vanessa. She kept her head down, working through forensic logs without expression. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on all of us, but no one dared address it directly. Not yet. Then, during one late-night data pass, we found it. Our security AI pinged an anomaly deep inside the archival nodes, a dormant backdoor embedded inside a logistics file from 2017. The date jumped out immediately. 2017 was the year I first exposed Monroe, the year he was discharged. This wasn't coincidence. Monroe had planted the seed long ago, a virus designed to sleep silently inside secure military systems, waiting. And when Vanessa accessed those old files during her internship years later, she unknowingly triggered the activation pathway. The full scope of his plan became horrifyingly clear. This had never been about a one-time breach. Monroe created a chain reaction using my sister's small mistakes as dominoes to topple everything I had built. He didn't have to break our family. He let us break ourselves. The room was silent as we stared at the confirmation data. My mother spoke first, her voice almost a whisper. He waited. For years. I nodded. Yes, he didn't just want revenge. He wanted to humiliate us. Quietly. Completely. Finally, my father spoke for the first time with true emotion breaking through his hardened exterior. And we made it easy for him. He looked directly at me, the first eye contact we'd made in weeks. We let pride blind us to you. I held his gaze, letting the truth settle between us. There was nothing left to say, but one final piece remained. As we compiled our final reports for Joint Command, Vanessa approached me alone after our last session. She held a thin envelope. Inside was an addendum to the task force findings written and signed by her. She was formally taking full responsibility for initiating the accidental breach chain that allowed Monroe's virus to activate. She wasn't ordered to submit it. She chose to. By signing, she accepted a formal reprimand that would freeze her promotion eligibility for 5 years. As I read the document, she spoke softly. I know this won't undo what I've done, but I want to own it. I closed the folder and nodded once. That's what leadership looks like. The next morning, we delivered our findings. General Whitaker reviewed every line. When he finished, he stood from the head of the table, walking slowly around to face all 4 of us. Then, to my surprise, he extended his hand toward Vanessa. Lieutenant Colonel Carter, he said firmly, you've made mistakes. But owning them, that's rare in this job. Learn from it. Vanessa stood straighter, her voice steady as she replied, Yes, sir. As Whitaker left the room, my father remained seated. His voice cracked slightly as he turned toward me. I owe you an apology, Madison. Not as your commanding officer, as your father. He paused. I never saw you. Not truly. Not for what you carried. Not for what you gave up. My throat tightened, but I spoke softly. I never needed you to see me, Dad. I just needed you to stop pretending I wasn't there. For the first time in my life, he nodded. Not out of authority. Out of understanding. Weeks passed. The storm was finally over. Monroe was gone, facing multiple federal charges that would ensure he spent the rest of his life buried inside a maximum security facility. The task force was disbanded. The investigation officially closed. And for the first time in years, my life returned to something resembling normal. But normal never really fits after you've survived a war, especially one that started inside your own family. NATO's Cyber Defense Council reached out again. My nomination had been reinstated. The scandal Monroe tried to orchestrate had collapsed under the weight of the truth. The Allies had seen not just my record, but how I had handled betrayal pressure and personal devastation without breaking. That mattered more than any mission file. But before I left Colorado Springs to accept my new appointment, there was one final gathering. My family, for the first time, sat together not because of obligation, but because we wanted to. It wasn't a grand celebration. No speeches. No photographers. Just a simple dinner at the same house where it all began. The old dining table had seen decades of tension, pride, and silence. But tonight it was different. My mother passed dishes around with quiet grace. My father, for once, didn't sit stiff and formal, but leaned back, simply watching us as a family rather than as subordinates. And Vanessa, sitting across from me, no longer avoided my eyes. She met them, fully. After dinner, she pulled me aside. Her voice was soft but steady. "I still don't know if you'll ever fully forgive me." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "You don't need my forgiveness, Vanessa." I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "You just need to become someone who never needs it again." Her lips trembled into a small, honest smile. For the first time, we weren't rivals. We weren't competing for space. We were simply sisters. A week later, I arrived in Washington, D.C. My new office overlooked the Potomac, where the skyline reflected soft evening lights onto the river's surface. Inside my quiet workspace, I resumed what I had always done: advise, coordinate, protect. This time, not from shadows but openly. I still woke before sunrise. Still reviewed threat assessments while most of the city slept. Still carried the invisible scars of years few would ever understand. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. One afternoon, after a long briefing with NATO officers, a young cadet lingered in the doorway. He looked nervous, barely out of his early 20s, probably in his first major assignment. "General Carter," he asked cautiously. I smiled, inviting him to speak. "May I ask, after everything you've faced, after what you've seen, what's the hardest part of leadership?" I considered the question carefully. There were so many answers I could give. The betrayals, the loneliness, the impossible decisions made in empty rooms. But none of those were the true answer. Finally, I spoke. "Remaining human," I said softly. He frowned slightly, as if expecting something more tactical or strategic. I continued. "Staying human when everyone expects you to become something else, something colder, something harder. That's the hardest part. Carrying the weight without letting it turn you into stone." He nodded slowly, his eyes wide with understanding. And in that moment, I saw a reflection of myself decades ago, asking similar questions, not yet knowing how heavy the answers would one day feel. That evening, I took a walk along the water. The air was cool, the city humming softly behind me. The scars of my career weren't visible, but they were there. They always would be. Some battles leave no wounds you can see. They carve canyons in your soul. But strength isn't in how loud you fight. It's in how quietly you endure, how gracefully you refuse to let pain turn you into something you're not. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't walking away. It's staying. Even when no one ever expected you to.